Hello, hello. You have stumbled across Now and Zen, the podcast about microtonal and xenharmonic music. For JI purists, Edo fanboys, alternative guitarists, tuning theorists way down in the basement, academics up in the ivory tower, and performers in the concert hall playing all the notes between the notes. The music you just heard was Prelude No. 2 for 19-tone guitar by Ivor Darreg from the album Detwelvulate. Today's conversation was recorded on January 19th, 2019. My name is Sevish.
I'm Stephen Weigel.
And we are joined today by our guest, Dr. John Chalmers.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Today we have John Chalmers with us. He is the author of Divisions of the Tetrachord, and he has done a lot of stuff with the xenharmonic alliance, like when it originally started with Ivor Darreg, and he's also met Harry Partch. So, John, if you'd care to talk about that a little bit, I'm sure we'd all be very interested to hear your stories with them and what you know about their lives and work and all of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Just being part of the community.
Okay, I tell you, I got interested in xenharmonics, oddly enough, when I was in high school, that I had to take a music course, which I wasn't particularly happy about. But at the last class, one quarter, the teacher played Julian Carrillo's Preludio a Cologne in quarter, eighth, and 16th tones. And I suddenly realized there's a whole world of music I'm not hearing. Well, so I went to the library and I found Helmholtz's book. And you read Helmholtz, you get back in the appendices. There's things about 19-tone temperament, 31-tone temperament, all the Greek modes, Arabic scales and stuff. And so I really had very little interest in music up to that time, but I really got hooked on xenharmonics at the time. But there wasn't much I could do about it. Then some years later, when I was in college, Stockhausen gave us a seminar to our, actually Stanford in Germany. I was lucky to get into that program, which is Stuttgart. He came and spent a weekend with us and played a lot of things like Gesang der Jünglinge in Feuerofen and all sorts of things that were really non-12. He was sort of into strange just intonation at that time. So I went back to the States and went to the music library and wanted to get a book on this stuff, maybe take a course. They had no idea what I was talking about. But I found Harry Partch's, one of his albums. And I also found one by Alois Haba.
Oh, yes.
It's a duet for two violins in 6 tones.
Yeah.
So I must say that kind of terrified my friends at the fraternity house and stuff. I played that for them. Then when I got to graduate school down at UCSD, I just happened to come across an article on Harry Partch, said where he was.
Wow.
He was living up in Sausalito at that time, and I had a girlfriend still at Stanford, so I managed to get away occasionally from graduate school and drive up there. And I took a carboy along because we use them to grow bacteria and stuff. So if you look at his spoils of war, there are some small carboys, much smaller than the ones that are on the cloud chamber bowls.
Yes.
And those originally came from our lab. Every time somebody would break one, I would take it down to the glass shop and try to salvage either the top or the bottom.
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah.
And one night, I was in the library and really bored out of my mind. So I started looking in back issues of the Acoustic Society of America's journal and came across a little abstract of a paper by Tillman Schaefer where he had built a 19-tone electronic instrument.
Wow.
And he lived in San Diego. And this is, of course, 20, 30 years later. So I just called him up. And yeah, he was still alive and invited me over. In fact, he actually gave me the instrument to give to Ivor Darreg, whom he knew. And this is really interesting because it was a metallophone, electrically, set up somehow, so they struck electrically. But the bars were specially tuned, so they suppressed the 3rd and 6th harmonic.
Oh, so that meant that the timbre would not disagree as much, like with sounds that didn't fit in with 5-limit JI?
Yeah, exactly. In fact, it was really based on Yasser's strange theories.
Oh.
That in 19-tone equal temperament, the 5th is a dissonance.
Oh, that's odd.
That was because the way he made up scales. And
right, yeah. I've read a theory of evolving tonality, so I'm like a little bit familiar, but I don't remember which notes, Yasser said were consonant and dissonant in the new system. I just remember the idea that if you have a 19-tone scale, then you have an uneven 12-note scale nested within it. And in regular temperament theory, we would call this mean tone 12. Yasser called it the supradiatonic scale.
Right, super.
And the theory postulates that perhaps you could move on to 31 and then have a nested 19-tone scale within that, which regular temperament theorists would call mean tone 19. It's the idea of nesting scales within other scales. Well, that's just so fascinating.
Well,
it's hard to even know where to begin with talking about all that because there's so many famous people in there.
Well, it goes on, actually, because...
there's more.
About the same time, let me say that Tillman suggested I meet Ivor Darreg, who lived up in L.A. at the time. And I did meet Ivor, and he suggested I meet Erv Wilson. But in the meantime, David Rothenberg, the theorist, not the younger man, had given a seminar at the Salk Institute, and I went to it, and I got talking to him, and then I went up to see Erv, meet him, and David Rothenberg was there. They knew each other.
Yeah.
So these connections, so I sort of got into the xenharmonic world. Of course, it wasn't named that then. And I got to know Erv Wilson then through this connection.
Well, it's fascinating. Yeah, so it must have been harder to study microtonality back then, especially since like the theories were kind of developing. So how many times did you see Erv Wilson, and what was he like?
Well, actually, I saw Erv Wilson for many years, up until a couple of years before he died.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't able to go to his funeral because they changed this funeral back an hour. And if I'd taken a train up to Los Angeles area, I would have missed it.
Yeah.
So I actually worked with Erv a lot. He came down to San Diego because I had access to a computer. So we made these gigantic tables of not only equal temperaments from 5 to 120, but we also did some massive tables of just intonation.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Up to, I think, 43. Now, we didn't hit every note. We quite realistically, we went up, probably 60 notes up for 3 and 5. And then by 43, we cut it down to about 2 or 3 in each direction because they got too massive. Remember, this is on a mainframe. And things are printed out on, big paper about the size of, my monitor.
Oh, this is in big paper times. Yes, I've seen those.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we printed up quite a number of these. We sent one to Fokker over in the Netherlands. So I had some correspondence with Fokker, and he, in fact, quotes from them in one of his papers.
Which paper is that? I definitely want to see that quote, because I think I remember reading it sometime, but...
Yeah, what he just thanks John Chalmers from the University of California in San Diego for the tables, because he said he'd never seen cent tables with so many digits.
Yeah, that's amazing.
We also did some roots of 3 and some stuff like that, and I don't know, I managed to lose all the papers in my many moves, but you can reconstruct them on a modern computer in 15 minutes rather than having do batch processing, come in the next day and find out it barfed after the first line or something.
Yeah.
So that's really how I got interested in all this, and how I met Erv and David Rothenberg and Ivor and Harry Partch.
Oh yeah.
Whom I just called him up and one of them showed up in Petaluma.
This is just so fascinating. It really is, because you're mentioning some names that are really considered legendary today.
Yeah, just all of them.
Yeah. I'm not just dropping it.
I know, absolutely.
Actually, to know these people. Also, the first time I saw Harry Partch, I actually had generated a lot of sort of what I would call them tritriadic scales, little 7-note modes made out of triads.
Were they all in just intonation?
Yeah, and he let me play them on the chromelodion. And he said, this really sounds interesting. And of course, they'd never using them.
The Helmholtz book I'd find particularly interesting because it almost parallels Partch's journey a little bit. He was unsatisfied with music school, as you probably know. A lot of the things I say, of course, are for the benefit of our viewers. Harry Partch, being a little bit unsatisfied with school, found the information he wanted in Helmholtz's book.
Yeah.
And I think I can relate to both of you as a musician who's been through school and wondered about the microtonality question and what some of the answers to the question would be. Not that I'm necessarily looking for an intense course on it, or that I was at that time, but I always wondered why there wasn't just one small blurb in the curriculum that would address it. to sort of like put my mind at ease or like set me on the right path to discovering more information. I guess maybe some musicians don't like dealing with math, so they like to keep it out, but they also have to take set theory. So there's that.
Yeah. No, actually, Harry Partch taught a course at UCSD.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, tell us about that.
At 7:30 in the morning in an old Quonset hut left over from World War II, because UCSD took over a military base, Camp Callum. So I was able to go take his class in the morning and then get the lab, around 8:30, 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Which is the usual time I'd show up. And I thought nobody knew about it, but it turns out that my major professor lived a couple of blocks from Harry, had some of his records, knew him very well, knew all about why I was around him, while I was spending the time. But so that's actually probably the most advanced music course I've ever taken. I've taken some simpler ones.
The course from Harry Partch, you mean?
Yeah. It was bizarre. I mean, one of the class exercises was he had somebody go to the chromelodian and just make up a random melody.
Wow.
He said, okay, now harmonize that with full hexads in 6 parts.
Wow. That seems really hard because, like, I know whenever I have a keyboard where it's just a 12-note Halberstadt layout and I add, like, a lot of notes, it just seems like all my piano technique goes out the window and I have to completely rethink how the voicing works. I think you get there somewhere around, like, 18 to 22 notes where it just feels too big after a little while and you want a keyboard with more notes. So I can imagine going over and making a melody on the chromelodion for Harry Partch in front of the class would be just about as terrifying as a class exercise could be. But yeah, that's really inspiring. It's interesting to hear about how he would teach because the way he talks in Genesis of a Music is just he's so specific in what he wants, and he's very negative of a lot of Western attitudes. So I've always been curious to sort of understand how he thinks and how he does things, because he seems like he doesn't think like a lot of other people. He is just a unique human being in that way.
Yes, he was an original, as they say.
Yeah.
But in the class, he admitted, he said, this is a very weird melody. Whoever one of the classmates picked out on it. But he said, try it and use both U tonality and O tonality chords. Yeah. So we did. Yeah, it was fun. And I didn't take part in his ensemble. First of all, I didn't have the time. I was trying to get my dissertation finished.
Yeah, I understand.
And get on with life.
Exactly.
But then later, I went up to the University of Washington as a postdoc. And then I came back down to Berkeley because my project looked really interesting to one of the professors in Berkeley. Said, hey, come on down and sit in Berkeley till you get a real job. And I had met some people up there in Canada. And one of them had a grant to study instrument building with Lou Harrison. So they showed up in Berkeley and said, hey, we need a ride to Aptos, but we'll introduce you to Lou Harrison. So I went down with them. Wow. And I'd already made up a large list of tetrachords, and I gave it to Lou, and he said, look, write a book. I'll help you publish it. So that's how I ended up writing Divisions.
And so this is how you got started writing. For those of you that don't know, Divisions of the Tetrachord is a book on all kinds of different modes and scales, not just the ones that you would learn from history, but sort of like all the possibilities. Am I right in saying that, or am I a little bit off?
Yeah, I tried to saturate sort of tetrachordal space.
Yeah.
I mean, you can put an infinite number of them in there, but they get to the point where they all sound very similar.
Yeah.
But I think what was interesting to do is you can do things. You don't have to just play tetrachords. You can, say, combine them with Erv Wilson's theories and have these aggregates of tetrachords rather than chords, as Erv Wilson would do it. So it was fun to write. I actually took a summer off from my job. The company I was working for at the time in Houston was not doing very well. And I think I saw on the internet that Larry Polanski at Mills was going to go ahead and publish my book because I didn't seem to be getting around to finishing it. So I can do that. So I spent the summer at Mills and wrote a draft, which nobody liked. And then the company was not doing very well. And I just came back out, and I spent half my time at Berkeley again. and at the time writing. I sort of rewrote it from scratch.
Yeah.
And Larry Polanski and Jody Diamond's Frog Peak published it.
Wow.
So that's how that happened.
That's great.
And,
With the Visions of the Tetrachord, it's interesting that you mentioned saturating tetrachordal space. You've sort of already done something that I would like to do, which is to, within octave equivalence or any given period, figure out how many perceptually meaningful scales there are, or at least if you have a scale step pattern and you adjust the sizes, something that many microtonalists are fond of doing or fond of conceptualizing, there will be certain adjustments where the scale will really just kind of sound the same. So, it's interesting to try and see, like, if you had a scale step size, how many different meaningful or distinct intonations are there of that size? And of course, there's a continuum of sizes, so you have to sort of set arbitrary criteria to pick those.
There's really two things you can do. You can compress or expand the whole structure.
Right.
And there's people, writing music with 3/1 rather than 2/1 to be the interval of equivalence.
Oh, yeah.
Or you could do the kind of thing that Julian Carrillo did, where he'd play a melody in 12 and then start and shrink it down and start playing in quarter tones or eighth tones or 16th tones and things like that.
Oh, yes. Ives does that as well. Yeah.
Metamorphosing pianos that he built. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Back in around 1980, there was an international biochemistry conference in Mexico, and I had done a little project on packing viruses with a friend. So I submitted a paper and was accepted. So I went down there, but I also spent some time going out to the Carrillo family and saw the pianos and
wow,
talked to Lolita. That was actually kind of interesting because I saw Augusto Navarro's book in Carrillo's bookshelf. Of course, Carrillo unfortunately was dead at this time, and I said I was very surprised to see the book there. And she really got bristled and said, he came over and talked to my father all afternoon and never mentioned him in his book. And there's a lot of real bad blood between the two of them.
Ooh, yeah.
I think all really on Carrillo, who felt he had conquered all possible tuning systems by going to 96 notes per octave.
It's a lot of notes.
So I asked her, well, why did your father only deal with scales that are divisible by 6? And she said, he thought the whole tone was a very important interval. It's really the basic one of music.
I think he's right.
Well, yes, unfortunately then, but you get things like 30, whereas 31 and 29 are both much better tunings.
Yes, absolutely. When I think about the whole tone, recently I've created a tunings work group for non-12N tunings that kind of use multiples of 6. It makes it really easy to retune instruments from 12-tone equal temperament to play them. Like, if you have a whole tone scale, you can retune it in 3 different slots to get 18 equal and 5 different slots to get 30 equal. So that kind of is, to me, it seems as practical as like doing quarter tones where you can just shift something and people will be able to play it. But yeah, 29 and 31 do give a lot better tunings with just intonation. Sevish, have you ever written in 30-tone equal temperament?
No, not 30. That's a bit of an odd one.
Yeah.
I've heard his piano in 30.
Yeah.
Because he had all the pianos were still there in Mexico City, so we got a chance to go down and noodle on them a little bit.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he never wrote anything in 72, which is the best of those other than 12.
Really? That's shocking.
Yeah.
I could have sworn I heard something of his in that, but I guess I'm wrong.
Yeah. As far as I know, he didn't do anything in 72, except, I don't know of anything, because his later work was mostly in 96. Or he would do things like he'd have 18 against an orchestra in 12. And then some pieces like Balbuceos and things, he'd have the 96-tone 1-octave piano playing with an orchestra in 12 and things like that. But I discovered actually reading this book called Julian Carrillo, that's called In Search of Julian Carrillo and Sonido 13 by Alejandro El Madrid.
Ooh.
And it turned out that Carrillo's 12-tone work, in his mature work, was almost all in the whole tone scale. So the whole tone is...
Oh, really?
Yeah, which I didn't realize. In fact, I really recommend this book. It also mentions Augusto Navarro, who was an equally important Mexican theorist who was almost totally unknown.
Oh, wow. You should say that name again for our viewers.
Augusto Navarro, Augusto Novaro. There is an Augusto Navarro Society that Erv Wilson started, and they still have a place on the Anaphoria site, but nothing's ever done of it because apparently Navarro's family are so jealous of Carrillo, they won't talk to anybody who's ever had contact with Carrillo.
Wow, really?
And apparently also there was some contention within the family over who got all of his instruments.
Oh, I can imagine. I always on my deathbed, that's what I'll be thinking about. Like, what are they going to do to my instruments? They probably won't play them at all.
But anyway, if you go to the Anaphoria site, his books have been photocopied, and they're on Navarro's 2 books are on the site. They're in Spanish, but the diagrams are perfectly understandable.
That's really interesting. The visuals in xenharmonics are usually, even if you can't interpret them right away, they're always really pretty and can be helpful if you're reading in other languages. I've sometimes been able to make a sense of things that way. What you say about the whole tone and Carrillo kind of reminds me of something that Easley Blackwood said, because he was very interested in 15-tone equal temperament and remarked that not having a whole tone was probably its worst feature. But other than that, it was a great tuning, because I think the remark was something like, whole tones are almost essential features of most melodies. And I'd sort of be inclined to agree, although you can always fudge, and 1/60 cents can sound like a whole tone if you're not paying attention and things like that.
Right.
Probably more so than 240 cents, but yeah. I mean, I like using whole tones. Maybe I need to get out of using too many stepwise melodies. I mean, Sevish, you're an electronic musician, so you write a lot of things that are stepwise. Do you ever write melodies that leap around a lot, like pointillistically? Because that's something that I find really interesting in microtonality, but then if I'm singing it, I always get biased and I want to do something stepwise because it's all so new all the time. So
Right.
Yeah. I've been thinking about that recently. I think I do use a lot of stepwise things because I noodle around and then just use bits of noodle that I've chopped up to assemble a longer noodle of melody.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like what Elaine said a couple of weeks ago. Those big leaps in the melody are what gives it the drama. There's a lot of opportunity there with xenharmonics to hit a really weird note. I'm just going to jump up to a diminished octave, and there's going to be some whole weird modulation that happens there.
Yeah, absolutely. Something like tonality flux, which I think was coined by Harry Partch.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wondering about that term. It just refers to voice leading between triads with small steps, right? It's not like a particular move or...
There's just one example in it, I think. But Partch liked to write things, where voices move by very small steps, from U tonalities to O tonalities, and vice versa.
That's definitely an issue where, personally, I really like small steps, but I also want my listeners to know that I'm making a step if that happens. So I would have to be really confident that my instrument wouldn't have a lot of vibrato or LFO or anything, and that the context was pretty clear, which unfortunately sort of limits the kind of music that I use with tonality fluxes. But maybe sometime in the future I'll be more confident about moving by small steps, even if the instrument isn't really exact or anything. I mean, it doesn't have to be exact. When I use small steps, I try to make the timbre of the instrument very different in its different ranges, so that it's quite clear that the note changes, and the pitch should be fairly steady. That matters more when you get really down to smaller notes, like 96, 72. Sevish, haven't you written something in 313 tone equal temperament? I saw it and I was kind of freaking out a little bit because it didn't sound like there were that many notes, but maybe I was missing something.
Yeah, it's true, but it's not like I had a 313 tone piano that was just one octave and about 4 or 5 meters long. that would be totally impossible. But I'm working with electronics, so I can very easily just take a subset of those 313. So actually, I'm only using 9, which is a very manageable number.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
I know it's really unfortunate that electronics didn't become really widespread until recently, because you had all these theorists in the 20s when people really were serious about quarter tone music another time, and I think it would have been, and also maybe even earlier.
Wow.
19 could have replaced 12, perhaps. It wasn't so hard to make a 19-tone piano and this sort of thing. I talked to Joseph Yasser once, and he said he actually had a chance to listen to some of his 19-tone scales at the piano company.
Oh, really?
Actually tuned 2 of them for him.
Were they 19-tone instruments or this upper diatonic subset?
It was the same thing that Joel Mandelbaum did. He distributed the pitches between two pianos.
I see. Yeah. Kind of like Jacob Barton's 17-tone project.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I've always wondered how much you can retune a piano, because Navarro had an 18-tone piano, but 17 and 19 are much better systems.
Yeah,
and I wondered, it'd be easy to tune it to 17. You just, tune the octave one note lower, or just leave it the same and just leave out one note to redistribute them. But whether you could stretch it to 19, I don't know. But with the 24, you could also use it to play 25 and 22. Well, 22, obviously, you could, but but I was sort of wondered about this, because Carrillo's just misses all the really good, harmonically interesting tunings. I think when you get up, over 60 or 70 notes, probably if you're off, by a few cents, no one's going to notice.
Right,
if you're playing it at normal speed.
Yeah, and that is even true for very large cent differences. The faster you're going and the more the situation affects it, even veteran microtonalists can be off by like 50 cents if the context is right, or if the pitch is slidey enough. So it's interesting that he missed all those quote unquote good tunings, and yet the music is able to sound so good. I think that's fascinating, but yeah, you definitely don't get those like nice fifths in 18. You're sort of having to work around it if you wanted fifths in the first place. It seems like it would be a good tuning for like atonality, if you want the atonality to sound really bizarre. But there's also so much overlap with 12. I sort of end up thinking that like the whole tone scale will fall in with it a little bit. It might not sound very xenharmonic, but that might be okay, Now,
Ivor Darreg thought 11 would be perfect for atonality.
Yeah,
and maybe 13. There just aren't any consonant kind of things in that, but yet they're not that melodically it's somewhat similar to 12, and they're not that many notes to deal with.
Yeah, melodically stepwise. Yeah, in my experience, 13's thirds are tolerable enough that I can slip them by. People who don't care about microtonality, they think it's like a little bit weird, but of course the fifths don't work. Yeah, that's a very interesting tuning. I'd go with 13 just because since you have slightly more notes, you have slightly more shades. So
sure.
11 is a little bit less chromatic than 12, and 13 is slightly more chromatic than 12, and all of that. Probably 14 would be good for that as well, but I don't think people like notating 14. It seems like in the equal temperaments, there's always like a certain mentality that allows you to notate them all, and then 14 is like this stick in the mud that requires a unique solution or like some other thing. Of course, you can notate it as a chain of 7 equal fifths and then offset it by 1 chain, but that's not very like triadically friendly.
So. Right. I'm trying to think. I think easily Blackwood has a piece in 14, doesn't he?
Yes, he. And
Ivor Darreg did one too.
I think I've heard that.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know if you all have heard of Detwelvulate. You probably have it. I think I have it.
I've certainly heard of Detwelvulate because I knew Ivor Darreg until a week before he died. Actually, it was kind of an interesting day. I had dropped by his house to drop something off, and I heard someone screaming coming from inside it. And I was wondering if maybe he'd been mugged or something. And so I kind of gingerly stuck my head in and, you all right? And Jonathan Glazer is there. It turned out Ivor was deathly sick. He'd been hit by pancreatitis.
Oh man.
And ended up vomiting for a day or two. And was dehydrated. And Jonathan was going to take him to the hospital. I said, no, we'll just call the ambulance. He had Medicare anyway. So we called the ambulance. They immediately started rehydrating him. Took him to the hospital, and then he had kind of a heart attack or something.
Oh man.
A stroke, and he never really recovered. He was there for several weeks. So it was very sad.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting story. Some other time, maybe Jonathan Glazer and Ivor Darreg. So another book I'd actually recommend also very highly is Terumi Narashima's dissertation. Was published as Microtonality and the Tuning Systems of Erv Wilson.
Oh yes, is this did this come out very recently? Yeah, I've been wanting to get that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, it's a good introduction to Erv Wilson's theories. Not everything, because Erv had rooms full of diagrams and papers and stuff, but it's a very good introduction to his theories and his work.
That seems to be the big academic book on the subject now, because I know a complaint I've often heard from academics who are interested in frequenting the Facebook groups is that the sources on regular temperament theory tend to be not very citable.
Yeah.
And all of that. So it's really nice to have a book that sort of lays out all the groundwork without having to just talk to somebody who knows about it. I know that Kyle Gann, I think he's coming out with a similar book. I don't think it's out yet, but I think it's more like a beginner-oriented book about how temperament works than, about the theories of Erv Wilson, but the two are certainly related.
Yeah, there's actually a couple of beginner books out. The people in the Just Intonation Network, David, oh God, I'm blocking on his name right now.
David Doty.
Doty, is it?
Doty? Dotty?
He has an elementary book for people who need to get detwelvulated.
Yeah.
and also Haverstick's come out with another book too, I think. I have his earlier one here, but I haven't gotten the new one yet.
I think the new one is, well, I know microtonality's in the title, and it has that picture of him on the front playing the hopelessly microtonal guitar. That was one of the first pictures I ever saw about anyone microtonal at all, and then I got to meet him.
Yeah.
So that was crazy.
Well, this is Haverstick's earlier book.
Oh yeah, the one on the spirals.
Yeah, and actually, a really massive book on just intonation and all the skills you can do. Is this one? It's an expensive book.
By the way, the book we're referring to is I think it's Musical Mathematics by Chris Forster.
Yeah,
and
it's
$100, I
think. It may be cheaper now.
Yeah, I think it was that much when I got it. I got it as a present.
Yeah.
It's very exhaustive in its overview of authentic non-Western scales.
Yeah.
So I really recommend it for anyone who's having trouble finding those resources, because a lot of them are written in other languages, or you have to really search the depths of ethnomusicology to find out information, and sometimes it might not even be the information you want. So that's pretty interesting. And Chris Forster, I think he lives in California, right? He's kind of near
San Francisco area.
Yeah.
He has an ensemble. He teaches classes actually, and he's really been very active.
That's fantastic.
Up there, but we're all aging.
There we go. We sure are.
Yeah.
So you're a biologist, right?
Well, I'm a chemist at the moment, but yes, I was basically a biologist.
I was wondering if you ever used anything electronic in biology to influence your music making, because I've heard of some composers using data as an inspiration for their music, and that can be done well. Depends on the piece.
Not really. I was a geneticist. I basically grew mold. Neurospora crassa. It says the so-called pink, but it's actually orange bread mold, and did some basic intergenic genetics. But basically, we were looking at the tryptophan pathway, and in the system, there's a series of enzymes that carry out the steps going from anthonylic acid to make final amino acid tryptophan. And some of them are independent enzymes. Some of them are on a single enzyme, but it has multiple activities. And some of them are aggregates of several different enzymes that work together.
Yeah.
So I was trying to work out the genetics of it.
That's pretty cool.
So I did that as a graduate student. But just one day I heard that the computer center was giving free classes on Saturday morning, and you had computer time. So I found it no trouble learning Fortran. So after about a week or so, I started, programming musical scales and stuff.
Well, that's great. Yeah. I think everyone's computer should have something like that on it. Sevish has actually contributed to that landscape recently with Scale Workshop. Do you want to tell us about that a little bit? It's I feel like it's important for anyone who has a computer but who doesn't want to download a synthesizer and yet wants to hear microtonality.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to try building some different scales, rather than trying to get some time on a large mainframe, you could just point your browser to Scale Workshop, and it's kind of like a glorified tuning calculator that also exports tuning files that you can use in various synthesizers.
And auditions the sounds.
Actually, I just discovered it yesterday.
Oh, really?
And I had downloaded it and looked at it. I think I generated one simple, septimal tritriadic just to see if it worked. But unfortunately, I moved a couple of years ago, and most of my stuff's in storage, including my synthesizer. So any music I make has to be on my computer right now.
Yeah.
But yes, I do know about the program. It looked just like what people have been waiting for.
Oh, that's cool. It's not perfect, but I'm just trying. I work on it in my free time. But it's MIT licensed, so the source code is kind of free for anyone to pick apart and mess around with. So if anyone is really interested in computing these scales.
What's it in, Python or?
It's in JavaScript.
In what? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm actually not doing any computer music right now. I did most of my studies, the ones that you see the pictures of on my webpage, the graphics I was doing in BASIC, in true BASIC, and I can't get it to run on my new computer. I can run simple programs, but I can't run one that really does anything. And I've contacted the people who never got back to me. So I could get my old clunky computer out, but I'm always afraid it's going to crash permanently if I run it again. Because at some point I'd like to write up all those scale studies. So, I did this. I don't know if you actually know. There's no way you can see what I was looking at here. No, I can see it, but you can't. Sorry.
We could probably post a link in the show notes, so then people can see them.
Yeah, I think go to link to my Facebook pages would be the ones.
Yeah.
Anyway, it turns out I discovered, at least according to my rules, that there are 52 species of tritriadic scales.
52?
Yeah.
Where does that number come from? Is it enumerative or?
I tell you, I did it by brute force. I wrote a program to generate them, and I just went through and read everything as it came out, and I realized only 52. Then I latticed them out, and I couldn't see anything I'd missed. And then Craig Rady relatticed them for me on a triangular graph.
Forgive me for my ignorance, but what was it called? A triadic?
Triadic. It's just a class of scales. There's 7. Well, actually, you can have more triads, but basically, if you take 3 triads, well, let's look at the classical derivation, I guess by Rameau, of the major scale. That you have triads on the dominant, the subdominant, and the tonic.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So on F, C, and G, you can of course tune those triads in infinite number of ways, and that's how I generate some of the graphics. Also, you don't have to have them. I mean, you can dispose of the triads in many different ways by sharing common tones. So one way to do it, of course, is to have the triads by major thirds or minor thirds.
You mean be separated by that amount, so something like C, D flat instead. Yeah,
well, say you do it on C, E, and A flat, and in 12 tone you only have 6 notes.
Right.
And that's a scale that's used, but it's used a lot by the Russians. I think Prokofiev, and you harmonize that way. So you have progressions that go by thirds rather than fourths and fifths.
Yeah.
But of course, in just intonation, it's actually has 7 notes.
Oh yeah.
And so you kind of generalize this. You can have the tones shared. They don't all share the same common note. So Anyway, it came with interesting group of looking scales. They're very microtonal, of course, because even if you just limit yourself to 3 and 5. But of course, you know, when I did it, I let both the fifth and the third vary over the whole octave. So, you know, for example, so if you can only turn the scale upside down, for example, you just find your fifth as a fourth, and you find your third as a minor sixth.
So inversion. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess the version of it, and that's just some of the things you can do with them. But it made very nice graphics. So I've been in about half a dozen art shows, just showing the graphics.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
With the 52 tritriadic scales, were you only searching through heptatonic scales? Like, do you allow, you know, common tones such that there are either more or less than 7 notes?
Oh yes, I've started around 5.
Oh, yeah.
And I've actually gone up. If I go much above 19, it's just too much for my computer.
Above 19 notes.
Yeah. I mean, I've generated, you know, 19-tone complexes where every note is part of a major or minor triad, and they're all connected by common tones some way. They don't have to necessarily share an interval. They can just share a tone.
Also, there don't even have to be only 3 triads. There can be more than that.
Oh, yeah. You can have dozens of them. And I've gotten hundreds of scales. The program runs 35,000 lines of BASIC.
Oh, wow.
And I compute a whole series of different functions on them.
Yeah.
Based on some of the work of the late John Plain. I'm having, as I get older, I have trouble remembering proper people's names. People at Buffalo, they've done some work on scales, and they have some various functions of. So what I did is I actually have a whole series of graphics where I'll take, say, the ratio of contradictory intervals. Those are which they might be melodically seconds, but acoustically they're actually thirds. Well, the Greek enharmonic, for example, has a contradictory intervals in it. It has a third, it's a quarter tone, major third.
Yeah, this relates back to Rothenberg's idea of propriety, right?
Yeah. And I would do things like, you know, the ratio of contradictory to ambiguous intervals, like the tritone, and then plot them out. And I've got about 6 or 8 panels, each with 6 of them, because I was in one art show where we're supposed to do one piece of art a day for 30 days. Well, yeah, I can easily do it on the computer.
And then you got all your art done, yeah.
You can do it in 2 seconds.
And then you select the ones that look decent, because sometimes things are not very interesting, and sometimes they're just too chaotic to look at them. And I plot them out in the D by M plane, the dominant intervals. Is the thing. And you could do more things. You know, you could mix them, but then it gets so complicated, and I decided I'd done enough. So that's one project I'm still working on.
Well, that's great.
One thing I did want to mention, and that is that on the BBC, there's a very short program on Kathleen Schlesinger's work. Brian Lee, do you know Brian Lee? He's a Britain also.
I don't.
I think he's Facebook friends with me.
Oh, okay. Anyway, if you tune in to the BBC, I think it's BBC Sounds, and Music Matter, and the woman there's a German woman they're interviewing.
Right, microtonal composer.
Yeah, and towards the end of it, about 35 minutes into the 48, it starts saying something about Kathleen Schlesinger. I just found out about it before we came online, so I haven't had a chance to listen to it myself. Although
same.
Yeah, it's called Music Matters, and it's Amo Amas Amat, European orchestras, and Arnold in the U.S. And they're interviewing a woman named Diana Damrau, but at the end of it they do something about Kathleen Schlesinger, who deserves to. I think her theories are nonsense. I don't really think the Greek owlist. I don't think Greek music was based on her subharmonic scales, but they're interesting scales themselves.
Sure, yeah. I don't know what to argue about the Greek stuff, because I know people are really passionate about it. Like, if you've ever talked to Joe Manzo, for example, he loves history, and he always tries to tell me how it is, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know it wasn't that way before.
You mean Joe Manzo? Yeah. Of course, he thinks the Sumerians invented equal temperament.
I'm not sure about that one.
I'm not sure about it either, but he makes a plausible case.
There's a lot of work to be done there. I'd have to really dig in deep. With these older scales, it's interesting because when people cover them sometimes, I don't think they sound all that microtonal. Do either of you think of any certain, like, supposedly xenharmonic scales as not as xenharmonic to you? If that makes any sense. I'm just thinking about the thing on Wikipedia that I think is attributed to you, John, about how if a scale is played in a different tuning, but it doesn't really lose its identity from 12 equal, it doesn't really sound microtonal, or maybe it doesn't really sound xenharmonic. I've had this experience with Orgon 7. That's the scale in 11-tone equal temperament that alternates whole and half steps. Like the octatonic scale in 12 equal, but there's two whole steps right next to each other. And so there's 4 whole steps and 3 half steps. That scale doesn't really sound too xenharmonic to me. And the one in 10-tone equal temperament that's similar, that has 4 small steps and 3 large steps, that doesn't sound too xenharmonic to me either. So I was wondering if either of you have any thoughts on that, because you both had so much experience, and it's all kind of subjective, so this is a good meeting of the minds.
Well, Ivor Darreg is very clear. If it doesn't sound xenharmonic, it isn't.
Yeah.
For example, playing piece of classical music in mean tone, or even some of the just intonations that are adjustable. You can avoid the comma clashes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound that different. Playing things in 19 sometimes doesn't sound that different, unless they do a lot of chromatic things. So you really hear the small intervals.
Yeah, and when I'm playing in 19, if I'm playing a diatonic scale, I don't tell myself to do anything different in my brain.
Yeah.
I just kind of notice that things are a little bit lower on the minor second side of things, and I don't even really notice the small whole step very much. That's not really a huge problem. I think the larger minor second is definitely weirder than the smaller whole step in 19.
Yeah, but you get used to the flat fifth and the sharp fourth.
Yeah. And if you play it in a major chord, it's just fine. It's kind of like playing a 12 equal major chord or any group of notes where the more notes you have in a thing, the less harsh any of the dissonance is. But the more complicated the situation is.
Yeah, that was actually, I think, a Balsano was doing some stuff. And I'm trying to think what system he's using, but he said as long as you play seventh chords, it doesn't really matter how they're tuned. Well, he didn't really say that, but that's sort of what the implication was. I think he was the 19.
Challenge accepted.
One other thing. Does anybody have any idea about Elsie Hamilton's, where Elsie Hamilton's scores are? She was a disciple of Kathleen Schlesinger. In 1935, she was trying to teach Kathleen Schlesinger's tuning theories in Germany. I thought Talisha Go might be able to find something about her, because after the war she went back to Australia and lived until 1965, I think. But no one's able to find any of the scores except for a very few that are at the Anthroposophy World Headquarters in Dornoch. And Brian Lee and I tracked them down and got those out, and they're also on the Anaphoria site right now.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, there's a few pieces other people have written too, and one or two excerpts from one of her major works, Sensa, which was she wrote incidental music to a kind of a mystical 3-act play around I think it was 1919 or something, maybe earlier, about 18 or 19. So, even during World War I, cultural life didn't die out in England. But we don't have any idea what happened to her score. She wrote several major pieces. And in Kathleen Schlesinger's scale, where it's sub 22 on the octave. But I keep asking people, if anybody ever really looked. Brian Lee found some of her friends, but they had, I think, one of her instruments, but they didn't have the scores.
I hope they turn up somewhere, but I don't know where they are.
I've just sort of wondered, maybe the Nazis burnt them when they took over Germany. And it would have been the kind of music probably that they would have liked because it was too closely associated with Rudolf Steiner's theories and things, and he was in Switzerland at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not clear. It's not at all clear from her book, The Greek Aulis, that both Elsie and Kathleen were theosophists and anthroposophists.
That's fascinating. A mystery for the ages, I guess.
Yeah. I keep everybody who has any chance to go to Adelaide, Australia, should look to see if anything is still there, whether it's in a local historical society or whether, she has some descendants who, but of course things get thrown out, or they get lost and moving. Anything else? We've been on the line an hour.
Well, I just had one more question, if I can ask just another. So, in your experience, John, which of the scales or tuning systems that you've had experience with do you think are the most aesthetically pleasing? And not visually, I mean, but, that sound the best?
Interesting.
I don't know if I can really answer that. First place, I haven't listened to a lot of xenharmonic music recently. Although I went to a 12-tone, regular, 12-tone concert last night. And it seemed that it sounded out of tune to me in the first piece and the first piece after the intermission. And I've had that happen to me before.
Right.
That I had to undetwelvulate my ear. Or, of course, they could have simply, missed the introduction, missed it. Yeah, it was an interesting concert, actually. It was the Hutchins Consort. And it was a group of 9 violin-type instruments that were invented as a group by Carleen Hutchins. So basically you have your string quartet, and then you have another 4 instruments that go up an octave higher than a violin. And there's 2 instruments higher than violin, and I think there's 2 lower than the cello, and then 2 intermediate. Then there's a rescaled by viola, which actually is played perfectly. And then 2 cello-like instruments, and then a contrabass violins over 7 feet tall. And they're interesting. So they've been playing around here for about 20 years, and I've gone to a lot of their concerts, and sometimes it sounds like just one single instrument playing.
Wow.
The timbres match so much. And they've actually played occasionally a microtonal piece. So you feel like, they have a website, hutchinsconsort.com, I think. Hutchins. I don't know. At one time, I was interested in 19, but I realized 19 doesn't really sound very much. And 31, sometimes, I don't know. It sounds very soft to me, like the fifths, because of the flat fifths and things.
I really like 31's chromatic ability. And I actually made a software that demonstrates all the different relationships between major and minor triads that can exist in 31. So I've been using that to chain different chords together. So I plan to do one of those little videos where I'm singing all the parts, but it's in 31 tone equal temperament, and have the music below it. That would be so cool, because there's so much to be done in that, and there's so many possibilities, and it just sounds beautiful. It's just a beautiful tuning. I think it just does what 19 and 12 each kind of lack a little bit in diatonic land. It's kind of the best meeting point.
Yeah, 19, I don't know. It seems like it just sounds slightly out of tune to me. And it doesn't have any new consonances. It has some great dissonances. I don't know if you ever listened to the tape that went with Joel Mandelbaum's dissertation.
Oh, no, but I do have the dissertation itself.
Okay. I'm trying to think where the tape is. I think I got an interlibrary loan, and it came with it. I've certainly heard so. Anyway, he wrote these 9 pieces. Well, if you have the dissertation. And, he tried taking 12 out of 19 and treating it, and then modulating it through 12. It's sort of an atonal piece. And another one where he just took some subsets. And they're all very, very dissonant sounding, I think.
Yeah.
So I would guess probably 31. I think by the time you get to 41, it gets too hard to play on guitars.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
31 probably even. I mean, I've seen that people with 31 have to have a big guitar.
So I would think probably 31, and of course some people will probably tweak the fifths a bit. Some string players might, but that would seem to me to be a good choice. 41, it's probably even better, but it's too hard to work with. In 53, once again, you're 3/5 again. You might as well go back to something simpler.
Yeah, 53 is a lot of notes.
Yeah.
Sevish, what's your experience with 19?
Yeah, I would tend to agree, actually, that 19 does sound a little bit out of tune. Yeah, definitely flat sounding. And with the fifths, I mean, I do like a good sharp fifth. It really gets you livened up. But the flat fifth doesn't have the same thing. But I really like the fifths in 31 as well. I like the whole sound of 31. But 19's still good.
41 had a slightly sharp fifth, and I remember going up to Erv Wilson's house, and he'd had the people from The Sound of Music over, two beautiful women, and Gary David, and they were just bizarre things.
Oh, I've heard this. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one class, I was really astonished because they were taking like a 1, 3, 9, 13 hexane.
Yeah.
And singing the harmonic and subharmonic triads in it. And Erv was covering them sometimes with the guitar, but they were right on pitch. And they really got to enjoy intervals like 13 to 9, 13 to 8, this sort of thing.
It takes quite some work, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, they'd already done the work by the time I heard them, but they were doing it very well.
I have something random to say about 19.
Yeah. Okay.
I find that 19 is very xenharmonic if you treat its chromatic semitone and diatonic semitone as two step sizes. Because if you use the diatonic scale, you just have things like a low leading tone and good thirds. That might sound out of tune to some people. Although I'd argue that 22's triads are more xenharmonic as standalone entities, at least to the new listener. But if you use 19's minor second, it's a big minor second, and if you sort of chain them in a row and contrast it with the chromatic semitone, which is really small, like 65-something cents, the minor seconds or the diatonic semitones, they begin to sound like neutral seconds to me in character because of where they land, and because that's so different from where 12-tone equal temperament lands. It almost sounds like, like when you sing a porcupine scale or something like that, you enter into this like stepwise territory where things are just not landing on any notes you would expect at all, but the steps have a consistent size. So I think 19 does that really well, and it's maybe kind of overlooked. But I have actually surprisingly heard things in 19 that are generally dissonant. Like when people make music with it, they're often making use of that chromatic semitone as a dissonance or atonality or the supper diatonic scale or things like that. And the supper diatonic scale, 12 notes is a lot to handle. So usually people are doing things like that, I think.
Well, Ivor Darreg thought that tone clusters in 19 were the most dissonant of all the tone clusters he'd heard in other systems.
Really? You mean like just like what kinds of tone clusters in particular? You mean things like adjacent chromatic semitones, adjacent diatonic semitones? Yeah. That's interesting.
Like the old, like the cowl chords where you take your forearm on the piano or something.
Oh yeah. I tried to play the banshee once.
Or take a ruler and do it. Yeah. So
it's pretty.
I don't know. I think one of the appeals of 19 is you can use standard notation.
Yeah, that's a huge
diatonic,
win. Yeah.
The diatonic is not that different than 12. It's an easy step for people to make.
Yeah.
Rather than go to 31. Now 22 though, I really like.
Yeah.
You're in good company. I think we're all fans of 22 here.
Yeah.
Paul came out to music, not festival, but program we had out here at Jonathan Glazer's art gallery.
Paul Erlich,
and he came out and played a lot in 22.
That's cool.
And it sounded really great.
Yeah. That's a fantastic tuning. I'd need to do more with it. I have only written one song in it, and I don't think I made it sound very 22-like. So probably need to dig into that.
I think he'd be a good person to have on this series of lectures.
He's on the list.
Yeah, good. Well, now that I know how to access it, I listened to a little bit of Elaine last night.
Oh, wow, yeah.
That was interesting. I didn't have, I was going out last night, so I didn't have time to listen to the whole thing, but I will. And I also listened to part of your program on synthesizers and hardware.
I'm glad you listened to it. I hope you liked it.
I did like it. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to find out more about you, where would they go?
I do have a web page. I suppose I can send you my CV if you really want to know.
Well, we can certainly put your webpage in the show notes.
I don't know. I'm not a composer. I've tried doing a little algorithmic stuff, but unfortunately, I had a bunch of recordings, and then we had a sewer line break in the other house, and it flooded my studio. And they brought in a professional crew to decontaminate the place. And they just threw everything to look wet out, so I didn't have a chance to even try to salvage something. But they were little algorithmic pieces, and I mostly wrote them so I could just get an idea of how the various clashes between intervals sounded.
Yeah,
and so they sounded really great for about the first 15, 20 seconds, but after about 30 seconds, you realize there's no real structure here, like in a lot of early algorithmic pieces.
Yeah, that is the trouble with algorithmic music. It kind of sounds like one line, one fat line. But
I had, sort of microchromatic lines going in various speeds in various directions and crossing each other and stuff. So it was fun. It was fun to do it. I just spent hours down there at my computer playing this stuff. But a couple of people who sent me really bad cassettes, I made a cassette and sent them back to them. Never heard from them again. Sort of as revenge. But I haven't. Then I went back to work at the university, and I sort of changed my field from biology to chemistry. And I really, my interest in music continued, but I didn't really have the time to develop it. To sort of, okay, do you want to study composition, or do you want to actually, get something done in the laboratory?
Right. Yeah.
So I decided to be a scientist.
Studying composition is not a good way to find work.
No. And I was going to actually work with Ivor Darreg, because he lived, in San Diego then. But then his health started failing. Then he died. So I actually sort of gotten away from music. Now that I've retired, I'm hoping at least to get some more of the tritriadic stuff done.
Well, we're really glad you came on the show to talk to us. So I guess we can wrap this up now.
Yeah, well, it's been a real pleasure. I don't have a chance to talk about this stuff very often.
Yeah,
it's been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, and keep me informed with other people you're going to have. I'll make a point of listening to it.
Absolutely. This has been John Chalmers. He's a biologist and chemist, author of Divisions of the Tetrachord, just microtonal man who's met just about everybody. This is Now in Zen. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and our podcast sites are Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify.
All your favorite podcast apps.
Yeah, all your favorite ones. Spotify and Libsyn, which is our host site. From now on, our episodes are going to be released on the 12th of the month, because we hate 12. That's the joke. So be sure to catch our next episode featuring Sevish on that day and from all days henceforth. So thanks so much. If you have any feedback, feel free to leave some of that in the comments or on any of our social media sites, and we'll try and respond to you as awesomely as we can. So thank you, John.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
That was a piece from Harmonic Colour Fields by Warren Burt, and that was called Portrait of John Chalmers.